Does the gentleman from New York yield time?
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Dr. Ron Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to make some comments about the Marshall Plan because my interpretation is somewhat different than the conventional wisdom of the past 50 years. I happen to believe the understanding of the Marshall Plan is probably the most misunderstood events of the 20th century. The benefits are grossly overstated. The Marshall Plan, through these many years, has been used as the moral justification for all additional foreign aid. Once I hear it, I assume that we are about on the verge of extending and expanding our foreign aid overseas. When you look at the total amount of money that flowed into Europe following World War II, the amount that came from the American taxpayers was not large. The large amount came from corporations and investors who believed that Europe would be safe and secure. So a large number of dollars then flowed into Europe. And it was interesting that the conditions were improved in Europe, not so much because of America, but sometimes in spite of America. Because many of our economists went to Europe at this time and advised them that the most important thing that they do, especially in Germany, was to maintain wage and price controls. Here in this country, we did not learn, and hopefully we have finally learned a lesson, but we had not learned until at least 1971 that wage and price controls were not a good idea. And yet, Ludwig Erhard at that time defied the strong advice by the American advisors and took off wage and price controls, kept taxes low, kept regulations low, produced political conditions which were very conducive to investment, and this is what caused the real recovery in Europe. Political assistance, funds flowing into a country through political maneuvers are never superior to those funds that flow into a country for the reasons of the political stability. And because Europe did invite capital, this was the real reason why Europe recovered. Foreign aid is used frequently throughout the world to help people. But if you look at Zaire, Rwanda, and the many countries of the world, foreign aid has really been a gross failure. Matter of fact, it does harm because it encourages the status quo. The market is much smarter than we as politicians, because if the market and the political conditions are not right, that country that wants capital must improve those conditions to invite the capital. A good example might be in Vietnam at the current time. They changed their conditions to invite capital. So there must be an incentive for those countries to change their condition. Foreign aid, very often and very accurately, I believe, is a condition of taking money from the poor people in a rich country and giving it to the rich people of a poor country. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because the burden of taxation and inflation and the many things that our average citizen and our middle-class citizens suffer comes from over-expenditures and good intentions, whether they're here at home or overseas. But we believed at that time that, and strongly so, I guess still, the government's responsibility through government expenditures or through the inflationary machinery of the Federal Reserve, that if we stimulate an economy, if we are the prime the pump, so to speak, that we can stimulate the economy. And this was the argument after World War II, that we would prime the pump. That is not a free market notion. That is a Keynesian notion, which really has, there's been no proof that this is beneficial. Really, what counts is a sound currency. Germany, after World War II, and even to this date, is known to have a harder and sounder currency than any other currency in Europe. Political stability is what is necessary, not taking money from taxpayers from one country and shifting it to another one. Foreign aid, very often, not so much foreign aid that went to Europe, I would grant you. The other conditions compensated and didn't allow the foreign aid to be damaging so much as the foreign aid, say, to a country like Rwanda. That was so destabilizing because the politicians get hold of the money and they use it for political reasons. Money to help a country must go in because conditions are beneficial and they encourage investment, encourage the market to work. So I would argue that there is a different interpretation. I know that the support for this bill is justified, but I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California.
I am pleased to yield 3 minutes to my colleague from Connecticut.
The gentleman from Connecticut is recognized for 3 minutes.
I can't help but respond to my colleague's comments, and while I think he's well-intentioned, there's some issues that I think have to be addressed. The United States, at the end of World War II, spent $16 billion in 1950s dollars in Western Europe because we understood that while the best avenue may be the private sector initiatives and other issues at hand, the reality was without that economic assistance, there was a danger that Western Europe would destabilize, that much of it would be taken over by Soviet influence. And so we recognized that short-term expenditure was the right thing to do for human rights, for economic opportunity, for political rights. And I think to say that that model only worked at that one time in history, frankly, doesn't meet the historical test. If you take a look at the countries that are our biggest purchasers of grain products today, there are many of the countries that started off under a PL 480 program. Now, to argue that there are still some countries in the world that haven't recovered is not, frankly, an established argument. You know, when you look at any program, it works best on certain areas, and other areas are more difficult to get to. It doesn't mean that there isn't a benefit to us in that area. Let me finish with these 2 points. I'll be happy to yield. One is, every place we have played a major role in establishing democratic governments, governments that respect human rights. Not only have we done the right thing, we then turn out to have the best markets there. But it has taken a cooperation between government and the private sector, and you can't do it without both. I would say the same things happen in agricultural sales, that in the countries where we've provided the most generosity of the American people to providing assistance, those are the countries that have turned out to be the largest purchasers of American agricultural products, which helps our trade balance immensely. And lastly, I would say that if you think the tax burden in this country is distributed badly, I agree with that. Let's vote for a more progressive tax. There's a very easy solution to that. Yes, sir.
Would the gentleman yield? Well, I would vote to change the taxes, but mainly to lower them for everybody. But I think that the point that I'm trying to make is that the large capital to help Europe recover did not come from the taxpayers. That was a small amount. There were a lot of other investors that went into Europe, and the key reason was the political stability and the good economic climate, which Earhart helped to introduce. I think that's so much important. There is a difference between what happened in Europe versus the waste that we had in Rwanda. We didn't do the poor people of Rwanda, very many favors by sending money down there that became a political weapon to suppress the poor.
I would say reclaim my...
Time has expired. Gentleman from
I
California.
would like to yield myself as much time as I consume to respond to some of the observations my colleague from Texas made. I think my colleague from Texas is correct in recognizing the importance of private investment flows to Europe. I think they played an absolutely critical role in European recovery. But I wonder whether he would not agree with me that without creating the framework of political stability, military security, the rebuilding infrastructure, the absolutely indispensable achievements of the Marshall Plan, none of that capital would have flown into Europe. I was in Europe in 1945 and in 1946 and in 1947. It was a continent of devastation, destruction, hopelessness, and despair. No American company was interested in investing in a battlefield, which Europe was at the end of the Second World War. It was the creativity and the vision of American political leadership on a bipartisan basis that created the framework for all of the subsequent investments and trade which flowed after the basic preconditions were created by the Marshall Plan. My friend from Texas should rejoice with us that this was a shining moment of American history. It was one of the most beautiful moments of American history when we went in to do good and succeeded in doing well for us and for our European friends. I don't see any point in diminishing this achievement of President Truman and Secretary of State Marshall and Senator Vandenberg and Congressman Christian Herter, who served in this body and who as a Republican did so much to support these measures. When the history of this century is written, there will be a shining moment of American bipartisan political leadership, which is represented as we celebrate it with the Marshall Plan. What is called for now is a recognition that the Marshall Plan, because of Soviet occupation of Central and Eastern Europe, could only do half the job. It could only do the job in Western Europe. We, along with our European friends, now have an opportunity to complete the job. I'm delighted to yield to my friend.
Thank you for yielding. I think that there could not be an argument made that every dollar that we sent to Europe didn't have some beneficial effect. Quite possibly it did. But my point is that if that money from the taxpayer had not been sent, there's nothing that says that might not have been sent through the investors, but it depended on the political climate and what they did. I don't want to de-emphasize that. That is the important reason why this foreign aid wasn't as harmful as it usually is, and it became it had some benefits mainly because of the
If I may reclaim my time, not only wasn't it harmful, it was the inevitable precondition of development. You should be open-minded enough to admit that this was an enormously statesmanlike and incredibly successful measure. And I have difficulty visualizing the need 50 years later, looking at a success story, trying to denigrate it. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time.